Hi, welcome back to Pin Cut Sew. I was just about to clean my sewing room, which I weirdly enjoy doing. But first I decided to film a video about sewing room organization because I am kind of a mess in some areas of life, but sewing room organization I have down like a pro. So I'm going to share with you my pro tips for organizing your craft or sewing room today. But first, a disclaimer, let me just say I know that some creative people thrive in their creative mess, and if that is you, more power to you. I am not that person. So if you find yourself sort of bogged down to get started on any project because first you have to dig through all your craft stuff to find what you need or even to make space to work, this video is for you because I have some tried and true solutions. I hardly ever have to reorganize my craft stuff, my sewing stuff. So I have some systems and some habits that will help you. First though, be sure and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss future tutorials and tips videos coming up, and give me a follow on Instagram if you want at PinCutSew. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, I'll start by telling you that I have not always had a big sewing room like I have now and like I had in my last house. In fact, some of my sewing rooms have been in a dark, dingy basement. Sometimes they've been a corner of my living room when my kids were little. And in one state, they were in a pass-through hallway in my upstairs of the house. So I have not always had a large space. And in fact, if you have a small space, these tips might apply to you even more because you really have to keep it contained then. My first tip is to opt for closed storage rather than open storage. A lot of people think I need storage, so I need shelves. But if you change that way of thinking into I need drawers, then all of your belongings can be safely stowed away. They'll be free from dust and sun damage, and they won't just be a visual cluttery mess everywhere. Because even well-organized shelves, for me anyway, just look like visual clutter. So most people, they put books on shelves, they put fabric on shelves, they put patterns in bins on shelves. But I opt for closed storage, and this is where dressers come in very handy. Anything with drawers. My large cutting table, I'm looking at it right now, is a secondhand dresser. Someone hand built it, so it's solid wood, very heavy. Our movers love us every time. But we replaced the top on it and with a larger cutting surface, and I painted it and replaced the handles, and now it's just big drawers. So all of my fabric is in there. All my patterns are in there, a lot of my notions. I also have a separate cabinet that my father-in-law built me, but it's all drawers. I have this hutch next to me that has closed storage. So for me, to avoid visual chaos, I like to put things in closed storage. I know there's some people who prefer to have things open where they can see them. But if you have drawers, this is where my next tip comes in very handy. I'm sure you've heard of Marie Kondo. If you read her book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, most of the book is a little bit out there for me, but the one life-changing tip for me was the way she files clothing. So she recommends instead of stacking your folded clothes, you file them this way so you can see everything. And I've been doing that with my clothes now for probably 7 or 8 years since I read that book. And I can see everything in those drawers. So it didn't take me long to translate those skills to my fabric stash. Not just my fabrics, but also my patterns, my ribbons, everything gets filed vertically, so I don't have to upend an entire stack of fabric to find what I'm looking for. I can open the drawer and see everything. And bonus, I never have to go through and refold and reorganize. I do clean it out, but I never have to refold it. So filing instead of stacking is my next tip, which is made much easier in drawers than on shelves. Okay, third, keep handy things handy. So the things that you use all the time, it doesn't make sense to keep those put away in drawers and stuff. For that kind of thing, it does make sense to have it out on your desk in pretty containers. Of course, they don't have to be pretty. Maybe you don't care about that kind of stuff, but I like my containers to be cute. I have a metal silverware holder that holds on my cutting desk that I put all my scissors and things in, and just the things that I need to reach for and grab all the time. Other things that I use less often just goes in the drawers with the rest of my stuff. But the most used things, my pin cushions, seam rippers, my chopstick for turning, even my hemostats, all of those things go in either cute flower pots or silverware, those divided silverware containers, those things like that. pins, of course, thread. Some people keep thread out, but I keep my thread in a drawer. It just keeps it organized, keeps it from getting dusty. And also, I just don't like, again, I don't like the visual clutter. So I just open the drawer and get the thread that I need. This kind of plays into that housekeeping trick that if things are piling up in a place where you don't keep them, then move the place that you keep them to the place that they're piling up. So, for example, if people take off their shoes right inside the front door, but you like to keep the shoes in the upstairs hallway closet, maybe just keep a shoe basket by the front door. So then you don't have to constantly try to get people to take their shoes all the way up the stairs, or you filling your arms with shoes. So this applies to sewing tools too. If you're constantly having to clean up your sewing room and put all of this stuff way over here, maybe just move its special place to where it always piles up. If you have a pile of pins always accumulating on your ironing board, maybe put a pin cushion there. In fact, those magnetic pin cushions, you can put those on the end of your ironing board, and the magnet is just strong enough to stay there and not get knocked over easily. So there's a bonus tip for you. Okay, so far those tips were about systems for keeping your sewing room clean. This one is about your habits. I definitely recommend that you tidy up after every project or two so that you can avoid the chaotic disaster that can happen if you just pile project on project. When you start to not be able to find your rotary cutter, it's time to clean your sewing room. And if you haven't noticed, a clean room is a blank slate. If you have kids, you know this is true. You might find that they never play in their toy room or in their room or wherever until you go in there and clean up the mess. And then all of a sudden, it's a blank slate of a room for them to play in. It's the same for me in my sewing room. Somehow, I feel so inspired by a clean room. Fresh project ideas start rolling in. It's just way more pleasant to be up here when it's clean. Okay, another habit is to clean your stuff out. If you start piling bins of fabric in the shower, you have too many bins of fabric. I know a lot of people do this. They accumulate so much fabric, their kids start moving out of the house and they have extra space, so they just fill it with their fabric. But the problem with that is that you have more fabric than you're ever going to use, and if you would give the fabric away now when it's still in style, then someone else can use it, rather than giving it away 20 years from now and nobody really wants it because it's brittle and it smells musty and it's out of style. If you're on my email list, which you can join, I'll put a link below. I told y'all a story about a woman in my church when my kids were little who gave me several bags of baby and toddler clothes for my girls. And I started pulling these bags. She was very proud that her and her sisters had been keeping these bags in someone's attic for decades so that nobody ever had to buy new clothes. They would just pass them around. But that's not what happened. Instead, decades later, they want to get rid of these clothes because so-and-so doesn't want to store them anymore. And so she gives them to me. I start pulling clothes out of the bag and they're so out of style. This was the early mid-2000s. These clothes looked like the clothes Michelle Tanner wore on Full House. You know, those clowny jumpsuits? They looked like that. So, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, if she would have given these clothes to someone when they were in style, they could have been really useful to someone. But now they're going to the thrift store because my toddler, who had style sense at a very early age, would not be caught dead in these things. And I just couldn't put them on my baby. I don't know. I cared about cute things. Maybe that was vain of me, but the lesson here is when you pass things along, you're not just sending them to the dumpster. You're sending them along to someone who will value and actually use them. Because if you're being really honest with yourself, you're not going to use your showers full of fabric. So when your drawers get full, it's time to clean out the drawers. It's not time to add more storage. It's time to get rid of some and make room in what you already have. Okay, so clean out often. That is my secret. I know it's easy for me because I move really often. My husband's in the Army. We move every couple of years. It's a lot. If you're a person who's lived in your house for 10 or 20 years, maybe it's time to go through, find someone who sells or list them on Facebook Marketplace and get rid of some stuff. I promise you'll be a happier seamstress. Okay, a couple more quick tips. When you're planning your sewing space, I know not everybody even has a sewing space, but even if you're sewing in a corner of a room somewhere, or if you're planning a big room, you don't need as much sewing machine space as you need cutting space. If you think about the process of sewing, you need a lot of flat surface space for cutting, not necessarily for sewing. So your sewing machine can live in a corner on the smallest desk you can find. but your cutting table needs some serious space on it. So when I was sewing in my tiny hallway in Hawaii where we lived, it was next to a closet where I could store some things, and then I had a drop down doorway ironing board on that closet door, because you definitely need an iron, right? Those drop down ironing boards are really useful for smaller spaces. And then when I needed to cut something out, I would cut it downstairs on my big dining room table and then bring it up and sew it. But if I was working on a project that I really just needed the table space right there, I would set up a plastic folding table right there in the hallway. And yes, people had to squeeze by it for several days, but thankfully none of my family has ever complained about the space that my sewing can take up. I made sure and clean it up when I was done with the project. It didn't just live there permanently, but it was a good solution for that space that I had. So if you're planning a sewing space, remember that your actual sewing machine space doesn't have to be big, but your cutting space might need to take priority. Lastly, to avoid little loose papers and things, I've talked about my sewing binder before, but I have a pink binder, and that's where I just keep sort of like loose printed patterns and things. I keep pocket pieces in there. Anything that would otherwise just be floating around the sewing room, I put it in the binder. And then I just, even sewing machine instructions can live in the binder if you don't have a special place to keep them, because you definitely don't want to lose those. So I think that's all of my tips for sewing room organization. It's time for me to go actually clean my sewing room. Let me know what you think about this. If you are a creative mess type of person, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Or if you had never heard some of these before, or if you have opposite ideas from me, I would love to discuss those too. I'll see you soon. Bye.